One thing to note is that this T is not unique. So how is this not unique? One way to see is that while defining, we had put in T of V3 equal to 1. If we had put in T of V3 to be any other vector, then we would have gotten different values for T of Y. Or if we took some other basis, like the values of V1, V2, V3 are different, but they still are forming a basis of R3, and V1 and V2 are still forming a basis of C, but the exact vectors are different. Like think about just rotating like three perpendicular vectors, mutually perpendicular vectors. So then also the exact values we would get would be different. Another, if you want to think of it in terms of matrix, this is a matrix that could work. How? See that if we multiply x1, x2, x3 to a, so a of x would be this 4 of x1 minus x2, like the vectors that we were given like in the question. This, we will get this, and this will be 0 only when they belong to the null space. So in this way, okay, so there's a typo. This 3 should go here and minus 1 should be here. Minus 3 should be here and 1 should be here. So you can see that this A also satisfies the condition that any vector that satisfies the given equation of the plane, that should be the null space of A. So this is just to give an idea about like another method that could be used to solve this. Now the second part was that if we want all the vectors that lie in the given plane to be the range of T. Not last time we wanted all the vectors that lie on this to be the null space of T. This time we want them to be the range of T. So what do we do? So just assume that C1, C, V1 and V2 have been defined as they were defined earlier. C is basically represents the set of all vectors that satisfy this plane and therefore corresponds to a plane in R2. And V1 are V2, and V1 and V2 are two independent vectors in C and form the basis of C. So now just take some basis of R3. Let's just take the standard basis E1, E2, E3. E1 is 1, 0, 0, E2 is 0, 1, 0, E3 is 0, 0, 1. So this set E1, E2, E3 forms a basis of R3. Now what is the range of T? Range of T is basically all those values that T can result in. Like we applied T to X, X belongs to R3, and all the values that we get after applying T to X, the set of all those vectors is called the range of T. And we want this set, the range of T, to correspond to C. So all the vectors that T can result in, they should lie on this plane. And they should like be this plane. So what do? We take T of E1 like earlier as I had described, that if we like for the domain of T, if you define the value of, like if you have a basis for the domain of T and you define T of all T of that basis, then you have uniquely determined T as it was done in last exercise. So here we describe T of E1 as V1, T of E2 as V2 and T of E3 as 0. So how does this help? So what it does, say we have a random X that belongs to X3, like take any arbitrary X that belongs to R3. Now since E1, E2, E3 form a basis of R3, X could be written as a linear combination of E1, E2 and E3 for some uniquely determined real numbers A1, A2 and A3. So what is T of X? T of X is T of A1, E1 plus A2, E2 plus A3, E3, and because T is a linear transformation, we could write this as A1 T of E1 plus A2 T of E2 plus A3 E of E3. And E of E3, T of E3 we have described as 0. So this goes to 0, and T of E1 and T of E2 have been described as V1 and V2. So this means that A1 V1 plus A2 V2 is the value of t of x, and that is simply a linear combination of the vectors v1 and v2, which is the basis of C. So this gives us the t that we want, such that all the vectors that satisfy this are the range of t. So this was the third question. Are there any doubts? Okay, so I don't see any doubts, guys. Please ask if you have any doubts in the chat box. Okay, let's move on to problem number 4. So problem number 4 again involves some definitions. Let this p of x, p of this square bracket x, denote the space of all real polynomials in one variable, and v be the set of p will be a subset of p of x, and it is basically those polynomials such that p of 0 is 0. So v is basically a subset of p of x, which is defined, which is the set of all those, only those real polynomials who have a value of 0 at 0. Now we need to prove that taking derivatives define a one-to-one linear transformation from v to this polynomial space, and we'll call it d, that transformation that takes derivatives, that function that takes derivatives, and we need to prove that it is a linear transformation. And the second part is proving the formula for the inverse for this function or transformation, if you are able to prove it. So proving that d is a linear transformation. The basic idea of a linear transformation is that, like, we just need to prove that f of a v1 plus b v2 is a of f of v1 plus b of f of v2. We can just like distribute it over addition, and we can pull out constants from the function. So how do we do this in this case? We'll take f and g to be arbitrary one variable real polynomials in V, and say that alpha and beta are some scalars. So we just take d of alpha f plus beta g. By definition, d is a function that takes derivatives. So alpha f plus beta g ka derivative will give us alpha f dash plus beta g dash, and that is by virtue of the properties of the addition, and that we pull out alpha because this is how derivation taking the derivatives work. Basically, we are using the properties of this d by dx. So we get alpha f dash plus beta g dash, which is nothing but alpha d of f plus beta d of g. So we have proved that this, basically we have proved that this is a linear transformation. This is the exact meaning of a linear transformation. So this proves that D is indeed a linear transformation. Now we prove that inverse of D is actually the formula that was given there. So let's call, instead of calling it D inverse every time, let's just call it F. So F is D inverse. So we need to prove that F of P of X is this integration of P from 0 to X. That, in other words, is the same as proving d of f of p of x is equal to p of x. So now what is d of f of p of x? F of p of x is this. So d of f of p of x is d of this integration, and d itself is the derivative function. So taking the derivative of this. So how do we take the derivative of an integral? Take like the function whose integral we are taking, that in place it with this upper limit, derivative of the upper limit plus put the value of that put this lower limit in this function to get p of 0, and then the derivative of this lower limit. So that is p of x into d by dx of x plus p of 0 into d by dx of 0. Note that this formula is like this type of derivative of an integral works only when this function which is being integrated is not a function of x. So if this would have been p of t comma x and we would have been integrating over dt, then we would have gotten a partial derivative of t in terms of x and all that also. So because p here is not a function of x, that term goes to 0 and we just have these two terms. And this, as you can see, is p of x. So indeed we have proved that d of p of x is p of x. So this f defined by this is indeed d inverse of x. So hence we have proved what we wanted to prove. Are there any doubts? Okay, I don't see any doubts, so I'll move on to the next question. Problem 5. Problem 5 is a good problem. It states that we have f from v to w and f is a linear transformation. And suppose f is injective and s is a subset of v that is linearly independent. So we need to show that f of s is also linearly independent. Now, what is injective mean? Injective means that f is a 1-1 function and s is a linearly independent subset of v. So let s be denoted by this set of vectors v1, v2 up to vk. Then what they mean by fs is this set. Like for each element, take the transformation, f transformation of those vectors. So fs is this set, f of v1, f of v2 up to f of vk. So we need to prove that f of s is linearly independent if s is injective. What does proving f of s is linearly independent mean? It means that we need to prove that if we have this set summation from I equal to 1 to k alpha I f of vi is equal to 0. This holds true if and only if alpha 1, alpha 2, all alphas are 0. This is the definition of linear independence. So now, virtue of f being a linear transformation, this thing transforms to, like this summation is taken inside along with these alphas. So this transformation simply means f of summation I alpha I vi, and this summation being 0 means this summation being 0. An important property to recall from lectures is that a linear map f of vector spaces is injective if and only if null space of f is 0. Lecture 7 gives a nice proof of this property and it is an important property, so please go through it. Now the null space of f is 0. So if f of this big vector, this summation vector is 0, this means that this summation I alpha I vi is 0, but v1, v2, v3 up to vk form s, and s itself was given is linearly independent. So by definition of linear independence, this means that alpha 1, alpha 2 up to alpha k is equal to 0, and that is what we had wanted to prove. So hence we have proved what we had wanted to prove by the use of this property, that null space of f equal to 0 implies that f is injective, and also the other way around. The next question, the next part was that instead of f being 1-1, f is onto now, and s, instead of being a linearly independent subset of v, s spans v. So we need to show that f of s spans w. So now f is onto. This means that for all, like every element in this w could be represented as some f of x. So for every vector w that belongs to this vector space capital W, there will exist some vector v that belongs to this vector space capital V, such that f of v is w. This is basically the definition of f being an onto linear transformation. So let s again be v1, v2, vk, and this time s spans v. So every element in V could be written as a linear combination of V1, V2 up to Vk. So let's have some arbitrary W vector that belongs to this vector space W, and for that we choose to call the vector we choose to call this V such that f of V is W. By definition of f being gone to, we know that this like such a V would exist. It may not be unique, but at least one of them would exist. Now, so C belongs to, now see that this vector V belongs to the vector space V and S spans V, this vector space V. So V could be written as a linear combination of all these vectors V1, V2 up to Vk for some scalars alpha x. Note that since S is not explicitly the basis of V, these alphas would not be scalar, would not be unique. Like it is not said that S is linearly independent, so we can't say that these alphas would be unique, but surely we could get at least one set of values of alpha x. So f of V is basically f of this summation, and f of we had chosen V such that f of V is W. So W is equal to, by using the linearity of f, pull out the summation outside and also the f alpha is. So we get W is this expression. This expression is basically a linear combination of f of Vi's. That is, it is belongs to the linear span of f of s. F of Vi's basically form the set f of s, and a linear combination of f of Vi's is the linear span of f of s. So we have proved that f of w would belong to linear span of s, and this w could be anything in this capital W. So linear span of f of s is indeed W. So like linear span of f of s spans is equal to W, which means that f of s spans this vector space W. This was problem 5 part B. Problem 5 part C is a combination of parts A and B. What it says is that the function f is now an isomorphism, and we need to show that f of s is a basis of W if s is a basis of V. So what does isomorphism mean? In our context, isomorphism can be thought of as a bijection. Like the function f is 1, 1 and onto. So combining the previous two parts, we know that since S is a basis of V, so S is a linearly independent set, and since f is an injective function, so f of s is also linearly independent. And what did problem B say? Problem B said that if f is onto and s spans V, then f of s would span W. And since S is a basis of V, it necessarily spans V. So f of s spans W. So now what do we get? F of s is a linearly independent set that spans W. So this means that f of s must be a basis of W, and that is what we had to prove. So that was question number 5, and again I don't see any doubts, so I'll move on to question number 6. So question number 6 says that let V be a finite dimensional vector space and F from V to V be a linear map. Prove that all these equations are equivalent. If F from V to V is an isomorphism, it is also an injective function and it is also a surjective function. All these three equations are equivalent. These three statements are equivalent. We need to prove that. So if F is an isomorphism, by definition, it is also injective and surjective. That is, it is both 1, 1 and an onto function since it's a bijection. So 1 implies 2 and 1 implies 3 is follows from the definition of 1, 2 and 3. So we just need to prove the other way around. So first we'll prove that 2 implies S. Let me first define some notations. let's S be a basis of V. So the number of elements in V, which is equal to the dimension of V, it is n, and it is given that V is finite dimensional, so this n would be some finite integer. Since f is 1, 1, again using the property that if f is 1, f is 1, 1, if and only if the null space of f is 0. So since the null space of f is singular and consists of only the 0 vector, the nullity of f is 0. By rank nullity theorem, rank of f plus nullity of f should be equal to the number of the number of elements in the basis of V, which is equal to n. So the rank of f is n. This means the range of f has n dimensions. By definition, rank means the range of the dimension of the range of f. But it is also a subset of V, and it has n dimensions. So this means that f, the range is itself V. So the range of f being V means that it's an onto function. So if f is onto, then it is f is onto. We have proved, and we started by assuming that f was injective. So if f was injective, f is also onto, and hence it's an isomorphism. So this proves 2 implies 1, and it also proves 2 implies 3. That could also have followed because 2 implies 1 and 1 implies 3. So we have done from 2 in the reverse